all for joining today. We're very excited to have Dr. Nikolas Norendale with us. So I'll first introduce myself. My name is Parish Patel, and I am one of the career coaches at the Career Center. I work with STEM students, so several majors from the School of Engineering, as well as a few from the College of Arts and Sciences. And I'll give a brief introduction to Nico, and then I'll allow him to speak more about his experience, his position. So Dr. Nikolas Norendale obtained a Bachelor in Engineering in Civil Engineering at Vanderbilt University in 2009, also a Master of Science in Structural Mechanics in 2010, and a PhD in Structural Mechanics in 2013, all from Vanderbilt. His dissertation was titled Modeling and Simulation of Armors Under Impact of Blast Effects. He analyzed the performance of structural armor under small arms, fire, and explosive blast for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So very interesting background academically. And now Nico is based at the Aerospace Corporation in El Segundo, California. So Nico, thank you very much for joining us. And please feel free to introduce yourself and talk a little bit more about the scope of your current position.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for that introduction, and appreciate you giving me the opportunity to speak with the students today. Can you guys hear me okay? Sorry, was that a yes, no? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, all good.
Okay, sounds good.
Like you said, so my research was focused in structural mechanics. So that was in the Department of Civil Engineering, but it was kind of a hybrid of civil and mechanical engineering. Since leaving there, I worked for a software company for about a year before coming out to aerospace. Our company is kind of like it's kind of analogous to NASA in that NASA works on what we refer to as civil space. It's the side of space that deals with space exploration, human spaceflight. I deal with national security space. So that has to do with the Space Force, Air Force, Space and Missile Systems, the Missile Defense Agency, anything that deals with space, our government, our military, and keeping us safe. So my job focuses on the structural systems within launch vehicles, otherwise known as rockets, or spacecraft, which is satellites or manned space capsules. Basically making sure that those things can survive the very dangerous and difficult ride to space. In undergrad, as I said, I'm focused on civil engineering. For those who have done any type of civil type classes, they know that, we deal with things that stay still. Things like buildings, bridges, roadways, everything is constant. Everything stays where it's supposed to be. Rockets don't necessarily do that. So there was a lot of learning. There was a pretty steep learning curve in that, but ultimately physics doesn't necessarily change, just the application does. So the past several years I've been focusing on the fleets of rockets that our military uses in order to send national security payloads into space safely.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. So if you don't mind, could we start by going back to 2008, 2009, and could you talk to us about what it looked like for you as you were assessing career opportunities, or you were considering industry, or perhaps the economic climate prompted you to pursue graduate school, and just what your consideration process looked like?
Yeah. So I will say the faculty at Vanderbilt had kept an eye on us and gave a lot of really good feedback at that time. And most students, especially if you're in the School of Engineering, we all have to do something called a senior design project. And you're paired with engineers of practice in the local area. And so I was working with one that was down in Franklin, and basically a lot of students use their senior design project as kind of a stepping stone to potentially a position with those companies. And that they're a really good resource to either work directly with them, or typically they know people or other contacts to kind of put you in contact with people who could offer you a position. And at that time, when I was finishing up my senior design project in 08 and 09, was doing a lot of, reaching out to our advisors on that project and, asking them what kind of career opportunities, and their feedback was, yeah, it's not looking good. Even their own colleagues were having difficulty, maintaining careers. There was a lot of layoffs going on. And so their advice was stay in grad school. They basically said, right now there's too many people graduating. There's too few positions. You're not only competing with your fellow classmates, you're going to be competing with people who are losing their jobs in industry and, who are being laid off and have that experience. And so, by staying in grad school, it kind of allowed me to, I guess, increase, some of the bang for the buck of, not only my time, but also increasing the polish of a resume. I'm basically saying, okay, not only do I know this material, but I have that extra degree. I have more of that special professors. Ken Pence, who is a professor who focused on economics and taught economics of engineering. One of his really useful points that he gave to us was that when you finish your degree, for the first 3-4 years, honestly, you should be paying your company more than they should be paying you, because what they're giving you in those first few years is far more valuable than what you're giving them. Your company is investing in you to train you up. That's why when you look at new positions, they're always looking for people with that extra experience because of how much money and time and effort a company goes to do that. By going to grad school, you're taking some of that burden off the company. You're doing some of that extra work that they would normally do for you. So that's part of why it's valuable. Ultimately, I ended up summer between junior and senior year. One of the faculty members suggested I look at a REU, or Research Experience for Undergrads. And so I applied to that program, and I did one at Yale University. And that program was really useful because not only did it give you a chance to see what research is like, as opposed to standard project-based engineering, but the program itself is catered towards explaining to undergrads what graduate school is, how it differs from professional school, like medical school, law school, business school. Graduate school is fundamentally different from those things. And not only in a what type of degree you get kind of way, but also in a how do you pay for it kind of way. And so there were a lot of really valuable things that I learned from that. And that experience inevitably helped me come to the decision that I wanted to pursue grad school, not just because it was going to help me, save some time in terms of looking for new careers, but also that was something that I was passionate about.
That's great. And I'd like to visit, you mentioned the Nsf Reu program, which is a great opportunity and one we promote to our students. Would you mind kind of sharing a little bit more about it and what the process looked like to find and apply the right opportunity? Because I do think it's a very valuable opportunity. So for those students unfamiliar with it, or how to engage or get the most out of applying or reaching out to potential PIs, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's been 12 years since I've done it. So, the process may have changed, but at the time, the general way in which it worked is that, it's a program, I believe, sponsored by the National Science Foundation. And essentially, it encourages universities, among which Vanderbilt is one of them, to pair undergraduate students to become undergraduate researchers under an actual PI, or principal investigator. So Vanderbilt is a, elite research institution. So chances are a lot of your professors are researchers in addition to teaching your class. So they are some of the PIs that would, engage in research and take on undergrad students. At the time, we would go on the NSF website, you look up all the different universities that were registered on there, you pick which ones you were interested in, because not only would it tell you, okay, this university has a project, but it would actually tell you what the project was in. So, mechanical engineering or civil engineering, those are big, broad terms. And it doesn't mean that you're interested in every single aspect of it. You might be more interested in one over the other. For admission to graduate school, it's really, really helpful to say that you have actually had research experience. And that's tough to get as an undergrad, especially during your normal school year. It's very rare that undergrad students can get research credit while they're doing a full load of classes. That's just really difficult to do. But if you've got, summer in between, or a lot of other students are doing an internship, internships are valuable, but in terms of getting into graduate school, oftentimes if you're trying to do research, a research experience is more valuable than an internship, because it shows you not only the technical side of more complicated problems, but it teaches you how to be a researcher. Researching is a fundamentally different idea than just basic project-based engineering. But once you connect with a PI, you get admitted to one of those programs. The programs differ ever so slightly, but generally the way the program works is if you work at, or if you get admitted to one of these programs, they typically provide some type of stipend or, paycheck for your 8 to 10 week program. Plus some programs offer things like room and board. I don't actually know the details of if all of them do. They may have updated that since then. My program personally did include room and board. The stipend wasn't a lot. It was, probably about the equivalent of minimum wage, but I got to live on a campus that wasn't Vanderbilt. I got to engage with 20 to 25 other students from across the country, all of whom were as big of science nerds as I was, which was a really interesting thing, especially when Vanderbilt's a really tight-knit community, but it's hugely diverse in terms of what people are interested in. And so it was nice to spend a summer with people who were also in the same place academically and looking at their future, looking at doing grad school. We became really close friends, and I'm still really close friends with a lot of those people that I made there. And a lot of us actually all did that program. A lot of us got our PhDs around the same time, 4 to 6 years later. And it's kind of interesting seeing that on social media after all that time. So it can be a very enriching experience.
Yeah, that's awesome. In terms of transitioning to graduate school, how did you think through a master's degree versus PhD, and what advice would you give to students that aren't sure if they want to necessarily make that your commitment right after undergrad, so they're trying to determine between the two? And I know there are pathways to get the master's first and then stay on, but for those unfamiliar with what that looks like, what would you suggest?
Cool. So I will pass along the same piece of wisdom that was passed along to me from someone who did a master's degree. And it's the biggest secret that is not a secret. And it is that PhD students will more often than not get funded as a priority over master students. And the reasoning behind that is if you're going into a grad program, it's again about the idea of who has the money, who has this offer of employment or an education, and where do they want to invest that? Graduate schools are looking for researchers. They're looking for creating the next round and the next generation of professors and research scientists. And those PIs and those educators are putting their time and energy and money into teaching these students. They're going to prioritize generally people who want to pursue a PhD because, yeah, it's going to take a little bit longer, but they're going to get a lot more from you. You're the ones that TA their classes. You're the ones that help them write the papers. You're the ones that run the experiments. And so that tends to be the priority. That being said, I haven't checked the statistics lately, but not only do I have a relationship with Vanderbilt, I'm also a visiting professor at Loyola Marymount University as well as UCLA. And both of those universities and most others, I believe, have basically what you would call a master's in passing, which is where you're in a PhD program and you happen to have taken enough classes to where you've actually achieved a master's degree, which is essentially what I did. I was in the PhD program, and eventually they said, hey, you want a master's degree, you can go to Baker Hall and pick it up. And that was the extent of my master's degree graduation ceremony, was walking across the street. There is nothing they can do to take that away if you decide after getting a degree you don't want to continue with the PhD. So the feedback that I got, and maybe Vanderbilt's grad program is going to call me up and yell at me for spoiling the secret, but everyone pretty much knows it, which is that if you're trying to make sure that you're going to get funded, you're going to get the highest stipend or assistantship and everything, generally I would look at applying to a joint master's PhD program, or one where the terminal degree you're planning for is a PhD. Even if you're not sure about it, or even if you're pretty sure you're not going to do a PhD, that's just going to really kind of cinch the likelihood of you being prioritized for funding. That being said, if you do decide to do a PhD, you don't just get to do it automatically. There is, every university does it slightly differently, but there's something called a qualifying exam that you have to take after you've taken basically the base foundational graduate school classes. We typically do it in like the first to second year, and you have to pass that exam before you can become a PhD candidate. And that is a non-trivial exam. Vanderbilt's, I mean, every department does a little differently. Civil engineering was a 3-day exam, 8 hours of closed book, 8 hours of open book, and a oral exam in front of all of the heads of the grad program, where they could pretty much ask you what they want. So it's not for the faint of heart, but we all, do a lot of study groups and prepare for it. So I probably answered way more than you asked.
No, that's great. That was very helpful context. So while in graduate school, what did networking or outreach to potential collaborators, or just even organizations that you might be interested in pursuing opportunities at after finishing your PhD look like? Were there specific methods? Did you leverage your network at Vanderbilt? Kind of a combination of things?
Yeah, so again, in the research world is a little different because the way you get into contact with your research community is through conferences. That's why before, just for context, in the research world, there's basically 2 tiers of peer-reviewed papers. The first is conference journals, and the second is journal articles. And the conference, articles are where you put together a, 5 to 7 page paper, and you go to a conference with your peers across the world in that field, and you present it so you can get feedback on it. So you can present your ideas and get people to say, okay, we've already thought about this. You should look at this research that's already been done, and try and help you make it something that is original and new and different, and what's going to most benefit the community. Once you've done that, you put a lot more polish, put a lot more effort into it, and then you submit it to a journal, one that is peer-reviewed, to make sure that the ideas are novel, the ideas are original, and they're helping the body of work. So conferences are the way in which we meet our peers at different universities, and it is the main source of where companies who are looking for people with advanced degrees will send their staff. So companies like the acronym for my company is FFRDC, Federally Funded Research and Development Center. So Aerospace Corporation is analogous to places like Sandia, Los Alamos, Lawrence Livermore, MITRE, Lincoln Labs. Those are the nonprofit organizations that are tied to different bodies of either the military or the government. They constantly send people to these conferences. I work for one of these companies, and I have gone to conferences in looking for applicants. So that's the easiest way to kind of network, at least in the realm of trying to do something that is research based. If you decide to go, especially in engineering, if you decide to get a master's in engineering, but you want to be a practicing engineer, it honestly really depends on the industry. They're all very, very different. But that will tend to go towards, the prime contractors and looking for things like career fairs and job fairs. And having an advanced degree will definitely set yourself apart on there. I myself have gone and done career fairs at UCLA and LMU on behalf of my company, and I get hundreds of undergrads and a handful of grad students. And the grad students end up with seniority by the nature of the fact that they already have that education.
Awesome. Shout out to Department of Energy National Labs there. I was actually at Oak Ridge National Laboratory prior to joining Vanderbilt. So yeah, conference travel can be a great opportunity to engage with other professionals. So very interesting. You mentioned kind of representing your organization at career fairs. So what do you look for when you're on that side of the table? And what advice would you give to students as they're trying to navigate those micro conversations at a career fair or a conference where you don't have the luxury of a lot of time. Maybe it's a couple minutes here, a couple minutes there.
Yeah. So I guess first and foremost is, and this is just a practicality of it, career fairs go on for hours, and the people doing the interviewing get exhausted and get hungry and get cranky. And so if you can get there early, you have a better chance of someone remembering who you are and just being in an overall pleasant mood. So that's just a practical tip. In terms of setting yourself apart, kind of how I mentioned that, grad students tend to be tends to be fewer of them. And so they tend to stand out a little bit more. In the same way, if you're someone who's about to start their sophomore year, you're gonna have less to offer than someone who's about to start their senior year. It's not your fault. It's just, the line that forms. You're in line waiting to get all of that experience. And so generally speaking, if a company is looking for undergrad interns, it tends to prioritize those who are going to be rising seniors, just based on how much they already know. There are obviously exceptions. I'm just trying to give general trends here. Beyond that, it really is a numbers game in terms of how many we look at. For full-time staff, if I'm looking for, my company or my department specifically only hires people with masters and PhDs. And so the number of applicants I get for that position aren't huge because the population of people in this country with masters and PhDs in that exact field isn't that large. So I'm, for a given position, I may look between, 20 to 30 applications. For an undergrad internship position, I will probably only leave the job posting open for like a week and a half, and I'll get 200 applications. So just real talk, 200 applications, 200 resumes, that's like a full-time job for me for a week. And I have other things that I have to do. So usually we use our human resources organizations to help scale down, the ones that we will actually spend the time looking at. And that's generally done with years of experience, GPA, and certain keywords. Now, at this point, I'm sure you're aware that most companies have to use things called like job bots, where they use a computer program that is going through your resume and it's looking for keywords. If you don't have the keywords, a human being may never actually see it. And, that's just the nature of the fact that I only have so much time in order to go through all these things. And so my advice is to really study up on what the company does, specifically what the department or the division that you're applying for, what they do. And, honestly, I've gotten a lot of people reaching out to me through LinkedIn by doing searches within LinkedIn for certain keywords that are on there that I myself have. And so I'll get students that reach out to me all the time saying, hey, some of them are from Vanderbilt, and so they saw that I'm from Vanderbilt, so that's why they reach out to me. They say, hey, I see that your specialties include X, Y, Z. I'm an undergrad. I may not have gotten to that subject yet. Do you think it's valuable to study that up like on my own time? And 100% of the time I say yes, absolutely. If it's too early in your academic career that you haven't covered a subject yet, or more importantly, covered a tool yet, I'm an engineer, we're engineers. We know that, the Accreditation Board of Engineering and Technology basically sets what your curriculum is every single year. We're well aware of that. For a lot of university doesn't always have the time or resources to get those specific classes in early enough. And so if I see a rising senior that has learned finite element analysis or some type of slightly more advanced topic, but they've taken a online class or one of like the free, I'm going to forget the acronym, massive online something, or the big courses that like Cornell and Berkeley and Harvard will offer for free that you just get like a certificate in. I'll see some undergrads that will take those, and so they can put it on their resume, and then I get to see it because one of these job bots flagged it for me and said, hey, here's an undergrad who's actually learned this topic. That does not mean put a thing on your resume that you don't actually know, because I do give pop quizzes in my phone interviews to make sure that they actually know what it is they're talking about. But it is reflective of that level of education. So I'm not going to expect someone who's an undergrad to have a graduate level understanding of the topic, but enough to be fluent in the verbiage.
Sure. So you mentioned LinkedIn and receiving kind of these outreach messages from students. And just from your perspective, how do you assess these messages? What characteristics do you think define an effective message, or one that you would say, I'm going to engage with this student, perhaps set up a call, versus one that you think you feel like was ineffective, maybe a little bit more transactional?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm not going to lie, not all graduates of Vanderbilt who are, out there in the work field are going to be responsive. I personally try to take an interest because, in addition to my day job, I also think of myself as an educator, as a visiting professor, and so I do have a lot of personal interest in that. That being said, the ones that are most, I guess, the responses that I pick up on the most, that I'm most intrigued to follow up on, are the students who are maybe a little bit more, they kind of given their response or their original message a little bit more thought. It's not just, hey, what advice do you have for an engineering student? Like, I don't know, what do I know about you? Who are you? What are you trying to do? What exactly is it you're trying to look for from me? Are you looking for general advice about my particular career path? Are you looking for general thoughts on grad school versus no grad school? Kind of helping me get to the punchline of what it is you're looking for helps me know, like, okay, can I just, spend 10 minutes sending a quick email response to them? Or do they need like a one-on-one phone call, which I've done in the past several times. But those students are the ones that are really kind of taking a thoughtful approach to formulating their question, knowing exactly what it is they're trying to learn from me or from someone in my position, but also, to be frank, being respectful of our time. We do have full-time jobs and are doing important things, and generally the Vanderbilt alumni community is embracing of trying to help the next generation of Vanderbilt alum succeed. But part of that is also making sure that students are understanding that our time is valuable, and so try and help us along in that way.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. This is an interesting one. Hindsight's always 2020, but if you could go back to your undergraduate period, and as you're evaluating career opportunities, graduate school, are there any things that you could kind of pinpoint that you might have done differently? And kind of along those lines, what advice might you give to a student that's maybe their junior year or coming into their senior year that are on the fence about graduate school, or what that next step might look like, especially given the current economic climate we're in?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing in hindsight is probably like the biggest groaner, because every single student will have heard this from their professors a million times, but I didn't believe it until I went through it, which is that your understanding of a topic is 10 times more important than whatever your grade is in that subject. Engineers, once you get out there, you're going to realize real quick that just because you have a bachelor's degree in engineering doesn't mean you have photographic recall of every single subject you've taken. Cramming an engineering degree into 4 years is a lot. Taking one semester of thermodynamics or circuitry or robotics or anything, that does not make you an expert in that topic. It briefly exposes you to the terminology and the general processes of it. It's just, putting it out there. Engineering is, and topics like it, that's why they typically say like your early career until you've been at a job for like 4 to 5 years, because that's how long it takes to really get mastery of anything. That's why a bachelor's degree is 4 years. That's why medical school is 4 years. That's why PhD is at least 4 years. So, when I teach, undergrad courses, that's why I'm constantly telling students, like, I care far less about what grade you get on a homework assignment or a final exam than if you've asked the right questions to reveal any gaps in understanding that you have to help fill those gaps, because there are plenty of topics that I was a PhD in engineering and started practicing. And all of a sudden I was like, wow, like I totally did not understand that topic for the past 8 years of formal education. And right now, 3 or 4 years into practicing, I finally get a topic that was first introduced to me 10 years ago. So don't take it too hard on yourself if you feel like, oh, how am I going to remember all these things? No one expects you to. It's part of the reason why, and again, I know this is to speak to a lot of STEM students, and I'm speaking very much from an engineering perspective because that's obviously my point of view. But that's part of the reason why when you take the fundamentals of engineering exam, you get the giant textbook full of all the equations you possibly need. No one expects you to have it memorized, but you have no chance of passing the exam if you don't know how to use them. So that's, an undergrad engineering or an undergrad degree in general is to introduce you to a lot of topics in a well-rounded way so that you can have the tools you need to go out there and continue to learn. I think, technology being where it was, 10, 15 years ago compared to where it is now, YouTube was invented my first year of undergrad, and it clearly was not to the level of where it is now. Nowadays, if I haven't explained a topic well enough to my students where they all can understand it, I can literally shoot them YouTube videos of other professors explaining the same topic in a slightly different way. So use the technology that is available to you now to understand the fact that the collective knowledge of the world is pretty much at your fingertips. And if it's not already in a PDF or a YouTube video, there is certainly plenty of resources for connecting to people who can explain these things to you in better ways.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And on that, and you referenced this earlier too, but it's a discussion we've been having with students. So especially those in an unfortunate position that perhaps their research appointment was canceled this summer due to COVID-19, the idea of technical skills development, but not necessarily through a formal class, just like you mentioned, perhaps a YouTube tutorial or these open source courses that are available. So for students that might not have experience with them, I mean, you vouch for the value in them. What would you say around how to pursue it and how to then kind of convey that to a potential employer or somebody that they're approaching to network with to kind of highlight these increased skills?
Yeah, so I've had experience not only in taking these classes, but also in hiring people based on the fact that they have them. And it is for these kind of examples of the fact that, again, my area is still focusing on engineering, but technology is just evolving at an exponential rate to the point where employers are placing more and more importance on understanding how to use certain tools or software that are not necessarily part of a standard engineering curriculum. And what I mean by that is that, there is fundamental software that engineers across almost every discipline use in order to do the engineering work that we do. Your engineering degree, your coursework, oftentimes focuses on the fundamentals of that knowledge, but you may or may not get much exposure to the software tools that you're going to have to use. So my first piece of advice on that topic is to do what research you can, either through LinkedIn, reaching out to alumni, reaching out to managers in your community at the companies that it is you're looking for, and basically, asking them, what tools, do you use that would be valuable for me to learn on my own time? Now, that's not to say you're going to be an expert in it, but becoming familiar with it is a big deal. My company spends a lot of money and time and resources paying our staff to go and get formally trained in these tools by the software companies themselves. Those software companies charge our company things like $5,000 per student per day to do these things. That's a non-trivial amount of money to spend on teaching our own staff things they could potentially be learning while they're in school. So I've told, my company was one of the, I think 80% of engineering internships in this country were canceled. My company was fortunate enough that we kept ours, but they're all still remote. And so, for students that are in my class who had theirs canceled, they all asked me, hey, what should I be doing? I said, you go and you find online resources and you learn these topics. And the benefit to doing it in that environment is there's no grade. So it doesn't actually matter. You don't have to sit here and worry about getting the right answers on things because of a grade. You need to worry about getting the right answers because you understand it. And that is what's going to be more valuable to an employer. And it also gives you the freedom to make mistakes. Mistakes are how we learn. It's how we correct our misunderstanding. And I oftentimes tell my students when they do make a mistake or something, I usually shout out to them like, good for you, you made a mistake, now let's correct the understanding. That's the only way we get smarter and get better. So, do research on your own time, do research into the types of tools. And I say tool because it could be software. It may not be software. It may be a new method for doing something. It could be productivity software. There are a number of tools that we, millennials and Gen Zers take for granted that people who are, the Gen X and the Boomer generation don't understand. Number one of those, how to Google things. I've had in my first week working, I had a senior engineer give me a task where I had to do some look at some bolts on some joints, and I Googled what the bolt type was, and I got a bunch of drawings, and I went and did some work. And 3 days later, he came back and said, "Oh, I forgot to give you these drawings." And I said, "Oh, I have them." He said, "How could you possibly have them?" I just said, I typed in the word, and that was a step that never even occurred to them. And so that's something that is valuable. I'm sure plenty of you, use Microsoft Excel. I cannot overemphasize this enough. Professionals, regardless of their industry, spend a huge amount of time in Microsoft Excel or some type of spreadsheet tool. That is not hyperbole. I probably spent 4 hours in Excel today. And so knowing how to use it really well, and not just how do I, make a spreadsheet and how do I add up numbers, how to format it correctly, how to do keyboard shortcuts, how to hyperlink things, how to make them efficient. Very, very valuable. And there's a lot of people who become extremely efficient at their work because they know how to use those tools. So it's not just engineering software, but things that you're going to have to use every day. Being good at those things is very helpful.
That was great. I think we could conclude on that. We covered questions that we hope to for today's session. Thank you very much, Nico. We'll hang out for a couple of minutes. If anybody does have questions, feel free to either turn your mic on, or you could actually message me through chat. You could direct message me through there if you'd like. So thank you all for attending. We'll stick around for a couple minutes.
Thank you.
Awesome. I think we're good to go then. Thank you very much, Nico, for taking time out of your day. Excellent feedback and advice. It's exactly the type of insight we're looking for. So we really appreciate you working with us for this and your flexibility. And stay safe out there on the West Coast. Things are tough.
Yeah, no problem. If any students have any follow-up questions, feel free to shoot them out to me. If I don't know the answers, I can ask around. But stay safe as well.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Have a good rest of the week.
Thanks.